Joining us right now to talk about the Trump agenda is Marc Short. He is Director of Legislative Affairs and Assistant to the President. And Marc, this morning we were speaking with Eamon Javers, our White House correspondent there. Asked him what he thought about the first 500 days, and he said exhaustion. They're just so busy because there's been so much activity to cover. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you think your biggest accomplishments are over that period of time?
Well, thanks, Becky. I think that there was a lot to do for the American people, and this president is dove in with huge energy. And I think that you look at the economy with the 3.8% unemployment, the lowest it's been in 50 years, the lowest ever for African American unemployment, the lowest for Hispanic unemployment. The reality is there's been more than 3 million jobs created since the president was elected, and the economy seems to be turning the corner. GDP has been growing. In fact, April had the largest surplus on record because the benefit of the tax cuts are beginning to see the revenue come in. On the foreign policy front, y'all were just talking a little bit about potential breakthroughs in North Korea, but the president's continued to live up to the commitments he made on the campaign trail, whether or not that is promising to move the embassy into Jerusalem, whether or not that's getting out of the horrific Iran deal, whether or not it's getting out of the Paris climate deal. Those things he's done on the foreign policy front. And then again, domestically, confirming more judges at this point in the history of any other administration, signing more legislation to roll back the regulatory burden. I don't know if, Joe, if it was shared misery before, but the reality is that the economy was struggling and the misery index was high as far as where we were with unemployment, where we were with stagflation, where we were with reality that the economy was struggling. So we look at the first 500 days as this president. I think the American people elected him in part because of the energy he would bring to office and the huge task he had to turn this economy around, which he's doing.
Let's talk a little bit about the foreign affairs front, because that is something that, depending on where you sit in the political spectrum, people will say he's done a fantastic job, he's opening things up, or they will say, no, he is risking some of our relationships with our closest allies. We talked with the CEO of the National Association of Manufacturers last week, who says that President Trump is on his way to becoming the manufacturing president, but also said that when you look at some of these trade disputes and trade wars that have now kind of propped up along the way, that we're not sure how history is going to judge it. It kind of depends on what the end results are. What would you tell him?
Well, I think the president is very focused on making sure that we continue to grow our economy and we get fair trade deals. The reality is that right now for America, on products coming in, the average is a 2.4% tariff, yet it's more than double that on products that we're sending overseas. The president's trying to level the playing field, and I think the tariffs are part of an effort to get us hopefully to one day where we have true free and fair trade in which there are no tariffs. That is the ultimate goal. But until we can get that level playing field, the president's going to do what he wants to do to make sure that the manufacturing jobs in America are protected. And it's exactly for the folks at National Association of Manufacturers, in part, that the president is pushing this agenda to reduce the regulatory burden and also to help protect those workers. And one last thing, Becky, on the regulatory front, you know, when the president came into office, he said he wants us to roll back 2 regulations for every new rule that goes on the books. To date, our ratio is 22 to 1, repealing 22 regulations for every new one that goes on the books.
I saw one of our former colleagues, Marc, Larry Kudlow, talking about I think just stating the obvious that some of the stuff it really looks like is working. I'm talking about deregulation, lower taxes, being more friendly to the private sector, not quite as adversarial as maybe the prior administration. So he says all these things are working. Is the idea, though, to approach some of these trade issues? Is there sort of the feeling that now's the time to do it? It might be a partial headwind. Maybe it's just decimal. Maybe it's just basis points on terms of a headwind. But if we're going to do it, now is the time to do it. And would there come a time where you realize, or the president realizes, look, this is counterproductive to what I'm trying to do. We're cutting off our nose to spite our face with all this other good stuff that's happening, and here we are where we're treading on, whether it's alienating our allies or making enemies of some of our trading partners. Will we pull back at a time where it's counterproductive?
Joe, I guess I'm a little bit surprised that often in the media there's this surprise about the president's trade agenda. This is what he campaigned on. It's what the American people elected him. When you went around to the Midwest of the United States, when I was Ohio or Michigan or Wisconsin. These were the policies he was promising, and we're so grateful to have Larry here, who is our greatest apostle for growth, and he's the one who's helping us to see.
Well, he's probably pushing back, Mark, because if you get, let's say you save 10 jobs in a Rust Belt area, but you lose 200 jobs as a result in some other, and you can connect the dots, and you see that it's counterproductive. You're well-intentioned, you're fulfilling campaign promises, but it's not getting you where you want to go. Do we know when to pull back on that?
Well, Joe, you're right. I mean, you don't want to have a policy that has a net job loss. I certainly don't think that's where the president's headed. You're looking at, I think, at this point, the steel and aluminum tariffs that have been implemented, I think, are pretty tactical and pretty targeted. So I think as you look at the overall economy, it's continuing to grow. I think you look at the numbers from last week, and it's many suggest it's exactly the right sweet spot we should be at.
Good morning, Mark. Dave Bianco here. Congratulations on 500 days into the president administration.
Thank you.
I like what you said when you said the objective here is eventually for a world without tariffs. I think that's a great expression. I think if the administration and the president can say that that's the ultimate goal, more free trade, globally fair, free, world without tariffs, I love that.
I think the president has said that many times, in fact, but I think the reality also is he recognizes that it's not fair at the current moment. And the reality is that American companies are facing enormous tariffs on the things they're trying to export, and the markets are not free for them where they're trying to sell their goods overseas. And I think the president wants to make sure that the American worker has a level playing field.
Mark, let me ask you very quickly. Midterms are approaching. You've got a House Majority Leader who is the Speaker who's going to be leaving, Paul Ryan. Does that weaken your position? What does that mean you can accomplish between now and then if you have to get things passed through the House?
Well, I think there's a lot we still have to do in the House. In fact, we have a farm bill that the president is anxious to sign, in part, not just to deliver new policy to farmers, but because that's the best place to get workforce requirements as far as food stamps are required. And so the president wants to see that program change. We also have a lot to do on the appropriations side. It's been 22 years since Congress actually completed appropriations bills on time. That's the key to getting the president bills he can sign and not having another giant omnibus on his desk. So we still have a pretty aggressive agenda, even though it's a midterm election year. And last week, y'all covered the president signing not just the Dodd-Frank repeal, also right to try, and this week signing VA choice bill. So this administration remains very focused on delivering legislative accomplishments for the American people.
Hey there, thanks for checking out CNBC on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all of the day's biggest stories. You can also click on any of the videos around me to watch the latest from CNBC. Thanks for watching.